Most people getting into Airbnb right now are either misinformed or about to make very expensive mistakes. So in this video, I'm answering the most common questions we get from people trying to start or scale. So one of the very first questions that we get is, can you Airbnb a property that you don't own? The very simple answer is yes, you can. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. Number one is you can do it through Airbnb Arbitrage, which is a wildly talked about topic that I'm sure a lot of you, if you have any type of idea of Airbnb and running it as a business, you've probably heard that term before. Another way is co-hosting, which is also a very popular model. There's a couple different nuances to both, but what I will get into first is Airbnb Arbitrage. This is a little bit more common if you have some money to invest, whether it's your own, maybe an investor, a partner, or you just get it from a business credit card, maybe your own credit card, whatever the case may be. If you have some funds, this is usually the better option to go. Co-hosting is usually the way to go if you have absolutely no funds whatsoever, maybe your credit is terrible. This is gonna be one of those ways that you can grow a business and you can make additional income without having to necessarily invest anything except for your time. However, if you have absolutely no experience in the industry, these homeowners are expecting you to produce income for their properties and you have absolutely no risk associated. For me, just being somebody that believes in accountability and in having skin in the game, I always am gonna recommend Airbnb Arbitrage if you have some funds and if your credit is decent. So Airbnb Arbitrage, just to talk about that one, I could go into long form videos about both options, but what I will just say as a quick explanation of Airbnb Arbitrage is, let's say you go onto Zillow.com and you see a homeowner that lists their property for rent for $2,000 per month, okay? They want $2,000 for 12 months from you each month. Then you go and you take that exact address and you put it through a specific Airbnb or short-term rental software such as AirDNA.co, which is something we can also talk about separately. But let's say you put that exact address in there, you put the bed and the bath count, and it spits out a preliminary number on what the property can potentially bring in on a yearly basis. Let's say this $2,000 a month property is actually expected to make about $5,000 a month in revenue. So you maybe are paying $2,000 a month for rent. You obviously have to pay utilities, Wi-Fi, you still have cleaners once the guest is checked out and you need to have cleaners come in, obviously some minor maintenance stuff, supplies. Let's say after all expenses are paid for, at the end of the month, you are left with about $1,500 to $2,000 in profit. You pay the owner, they get their $2,000 in rent, you cover the expenses with the additional revenue that you've made, and at the end of the month, you're left with about $1,500 to $2,000 in monthly profit. That's not bad, right? Let's say you do that with 5 properties over your first year in business. You're already making almost $10,000 a month. Next question, how much money do you need to start? Well, this is going to depend. What I typically say is about $5,000 to $15,000, depending on the setup, the furniture, and the market. But the very first thing you'll need before even securing a property is going to be your business name, LLC, if you're doing a C Corp, S Corp, whatever it may be, you need that structure set up. And you can obviously do this through a ton of different softwares and platforms that offer legal services and the ability to create an entity, or you can just do it yourself. It's pretty cost effective just depending on where you go. But that's gonna be the first thing, because yes, you are going to be leasing a property, but anybody that's in business and anybody that does Airbnb Arbitrage is going to tell you to put it under a business name. You don't necessarily want your personal name tied to it because you want to run a business, right? You want to be able to take advantage of those taxes, different write-offs, things of that nature. So definitely make sure that that's the very first thing that you do. I kind of just answered a second question in this one. But typically, even after you do your business name and you secure that, and you start looking for properties and you secure one, you can do one for as little as $5,000. A lot of people will come and they'll say, can I do it for as little as $5,000? You really can. You can, but it's not going to be a 4-bedroom pool home in Scottsdale, okay? You're gonna need a little bit more for that. But if you find maybe like a small apartment, a 1-bedroom or a studio that isn't through a large complex, unless you do get a large complex to say yes, which is a whole nother video and a whole nother topic. But what I would say is if you can find something small, or maybe even something that's already furnished, maybe it's a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom home in an affordable market with affordable rents that's already fully furnished, and the owner's, let's just say, renting it for $2,000 a month, you're usually paying about first month's rent and security deposit. And then if you don't have to furnish it, you're saving a little bit of money, but at least $5K, at least at minimum, but the more the better. Next question is Airbnb saturated in 2026? Short answer, no, but there are a couple different factors to this. A lot of people think that Airbnb arbitrage is saturated, too many people are in the market. I think if anything, it was probably pretty saturated back in like 2022, 2023. A lot of people got into the market. A lot of people were doing Airbnb arbitrage because you might have seen during the pandemic or during 2020, there was a ton of different courses, a ton of different gurus, coaches, masterminds that came out with different programs and ways to get you into Airbnb arbitrage. So it ultimately looked like everybody and their mother was involved in the industry. But really, that's not the case. What happened is, yeah, maybe a ton of people got involved, but years have passed, and anybody that wasn't doing things the right way, or anybody that wasn't serious, or anybody that didn't care enough to actually keep their business running successfully, they all got pushed out. So right now in 2026, I'm not gonna say this is the absolutely best time to get in. I'm not gonna say that because it could be, it could not be. It really just depends on you. I think ultimately one of those things is if it is to be, it's up to me. So whatever you decide that you wanna do, if you're like, I wanna get involved in Airbnb arbitrage, I wanna learn how to grow this business, I wanna be successful and I wanna retire my wife, my husband, I want to spend more time with my kids, whatever that goal is, you can create that with the right steps, no matter what year it is, no matter what the market looks like. But it is important that you still have those key factors, like finding the right property, making sure that it looks like it's going to turn a profit, designing it the right way if it's not already furnished and designed well, things of that nature, which again, I know this is a Q&A. I'm going on a little bit of a rant here, but I think it's important to keep these things in mind because that answer, is Airbnb saturated in 2026? No, but you also could lose money if you don't do things the right way. So it's not really about it being saturated or not saturated. It's about being able to stand out in the marketplace and making sure that you're setting yourself up for success. Next question is, how do you know if a property is STR-friendly? If you know if a property is short-term rental friendly? Well, first and foremost is going to be city regulations. So back when Airbnb was first a big thing in the market, and when people actually started turning these units into businesses and doing Airbnb arbitrage, there was not a ton of regulations, but a lot of people started cracking down in the years of 2019 and beyond. I think that it has chilled out a little bit. There is still some litigation between different counties and cities throughout the country. Dallas would be a great example. They've been talking about restricting short-term rentals in that market for the last few years, and nothing has officially been put in place. Very, very close in 2022, I believe, but ultimately nothing transpired, and they're still dealing with that right now. So city regulations are gonna be a big one. You'll hear about those markets, like one of the very first ones that basically banned it was Anaheim, and being able to operate a short-term rental in the city of Anaheim. But then there's other markets that follow: Kissimmee, Florida; Orlando, Florida; Nashville, Tennessee; San Francisco, California. I mean, Las Vegas, Nevada. That was my very first market that I ever entered, and I promise you, I think after 2 months of being in business, they started cracking down and they implemented all those regulations. And we hear about it all the time because people aren't doing their research. I remember when I first went full-time in my business and I was like, oh, all I need to do is scale. All I need to do is pick up more properties. Well, one of the very first things you want to do after you decide you want to do Airbnb arbitrage, after you get your business name, after you confirm that you have some funding, is looking into property and finding the right property that you want to secure. So that goes into figuring out what cities you're most interested in. A lot of the times people want the Texases, they want the Floridas, they want the Californias, they want Nashville, they want all the ones where it's like a big popular city, Seattle, whatever. And a lot of these major cities are going to have strict regulations, period, point blank. If they don't have strict, they're gonna have something, almost all of them. So it's important that you do your research to make sure that you're going into a city where you're gonna be able to operate legally. Because if you don't, it's only a matter of time. So city regulations is the big one. You can usually find out a city's regulations by going to the city or county website. Of course, there's a ton of blogs. You can go to ChatGPT. You can go all these other places and get an idea on if this county or city has regulations for short-term rentals. But the best resource and the best way that you can 100% confirm is by going to the city or county website, emailing the city or county, calling the city or county, and confirming. If you go and you search up city regulations on, this is just like a pro tip here. If you go and you search up city regulations on Google and you go and you read through it and it looks all dandy, no problem, and then you start going and looking for a property that you're interested in, oh, this one, that $2,000 a month one that looks like it's gonna generate $60,000 a year, oh, this is the one, I'm gonna secure it, I'm about to sign on the dotted line, I'm gonna sign my corporate lease. I would call and confirm with the city first that that specific address, that specific property is eligible for a short-term rental permit before you sign the lease. That would be like my number one pro tip, okay? You're at the closing table, you're about to sign this lease, they just approved you in your application, whatever the case may be, call the city, double check. It creates a little bit more risk. So number one, you have to make sure that the property is eligible for short-term rentals with the city or the county, but if it's in an HOA, even if the HOA has absolutely no rules around short-term rentals. Oh, you want to do a short-term rental? You want an Airbnb? No problem. Come on in. No worries. One thing about HOAs is, depending on the HOA, they can almost change their rules anytime they want. They can add new rules. They can all vote on it. They can decide that they don't want to do short-term rentals anymore. And guess what? Now you're at the mercy of the HOA. Let's say the city, no problem. You want to do short-term rentals? Great. But the HOA, if they decide to restrict it a year down the line, 2 years down the line, well, that just means now you're kind of out of business in a sense. So that can be one of those difficult things. And of course, it just depends. I mean, this isn't legal advice. This isn't me telling you not to do HOAs. I've done properties within HOAs. I've signed leases in buildings with management companies, like property management companies that are doing a professional apartment building, and the apartment building will change the rules. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is if you're gonna do it in a big corporate apartment building, the apartment building can change the rules. But what I have noticed is maybe with HOA or with buildings, if they change their rules, if you have an existing lease, a current standing lease, you should be able to carry out that lease until it's over. And once the renewal comes, then you have to make that decision. Do I want to continue to Airbnb this and just break the rules, or am I gonna have to leave? So anytime that the rules have been changed on us, we just carry out the lease until our renewal date, and then because we know we're not going to be able to Airbnb based on the changed rules, we'll just leave. So hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of all over the place, but that's just me giving you kind of my own experience from it and what can happen if you go into an apartment building, which everybody wants an apartment building, or if you go into an HOA. So if the HOA rules change, if the building rules change, just keep that in mind. It doesn't matter if the owner says yes. It doesn't matter if the city says yes. If the HOA and the building rules change, you're kind of at the mercy of that agreement from what I've seen. Same thing is if you're talking to an owner, let's say you find a property in New York City, and they're like, oh, come on in, you can Airbnb all day long, no problem, just give me my rent, you can Airbnb, you can do your arbitrage business. Then the owner might say yes, but next thing you know, the city is knocking at your door and giving you fines left and right because you're running an Airbnb in their city. Even if the owner says yes, what is almost always going to supersede that is the city, HOA, building rules. So just keep that in mind. So I should already be giving you a very, very good idea on what to look out for when it comes to short-term rental rules and regulations. So the last thing you would want to do is if you already have to potentially deal with the city or the HOA or a building, make sure that you get the landlord's approval. Don't try to skirt around, oh, I'm going to be running it for myself, but I'm just going to be gone every few weeks, or I'm having my cousin stay there for a couple days and then I have another cousin coming a couple days from then. No. If you don't get the landlord's approval, I don't recommend doing that deal because it's only a matter of time. I'm going on a rant here, but I think it'll be valuable to anybody that's watching. When you sign a corporate lease for your Airbnb arbitrage business, you are not only dealing with the landlord, you are dealing with the neighbors. You are dealing with the guests, who can sometimes be unreasonable, as any host can probably understand. You are dealing with the city. You are dealing with the building and their HOA if they have any rules and regulations. You're dealing ultimately with a multiple parties that are all involved. So the best thing that you can do is do things the right way. Is do things professionally, make sure that you're honest, make sure that you're transparent about what you're going to be doing. Maybe back in 2018 and 2019 when nobody knew what Airbnb arbitrage was, when almost all landlords thought that their home was going to be a party home if they said yes to this Airbnb arbitrage thing, times have changed. Owners are a lot more educated on Airbnb arbitrage and corporate leases. So if you get a no from somebody and you're like, oh, this property looks so good, but they said no, there's a ton of other properties out there that can produce the exact same result, maybe in the same neighborhood, and maybe even a better property that can produce more income. Because you don't want to have to be looking over your shoulder every single week, every single day, checking for fines, checking if they're going to try to evict you for breaking their rules, their lease agreement rules, whatever the case may be. You want to avoid that, right? So the best way to do that is by doing things the right way. To answer that question, how do you know if a property is STR friendly? Do your research, double check, call, email, read the bylaws of the HOA. Don't just take the landlord's word for it. Be accountable, ultimately, and do your research. Next question, can landlords say no? They're going to say no a lot more than they're going to say yes. Although a lot more landlords are educated and they understand the Airbnb arbitrage business model and they have a clear idea on it, sometimes they still may say no. They still may not allow you to come in and Airbnb their property because of their own reasoning. And you may have responses to their objections in your back pocket that you can use, which can be helpful, but ultimately if they're on the fence, if they're skeptical, if they're hesitant, I don't know how good of an idea it is for you to take that risk of signing the lease anyway. So like, for example, if a landlord is like, well, they give you all these objections on why they don't want to do it, but they say, I guess we can try it. Sure, like, we'll see, you know, and then they put all these rules in place and like, oh, I don't want them staying for, and this is kind of going into a few different things here, but let's say they say, I don't want you hosting anyone for less than a week, or we need to have quiet hours 6 p.m. to 10 a.m., or you need to let the neighbors know every single time someone stays. You need to do a background check on somebody every single time they stay. Although you can put in certain limitations and you guys can compromise on certain aspects, if you feel like even after you agree to all their rules, there still might be some hesitancy, just imagine if you have your first inconvenience with a guest. If you have somebody that's a little bit louder than they should have been and a neighbor complains. I've had so many clients that have reached out to me after they've signed the lease and said, we signed the lease, we put in a bunch of things in an addendum that we would have to do and comply with, and even though we do all of these things, the owner is still reaching out to us on a weekly basis to try to make us implement more restrictions to the guests, more rules. Like, it's just more of a headache. So forget a slumlord. Let's talk about like a Karen lord, right? So if you have a Karen that's constantly reaching out to you, trying to figure out what's going on with their property, they're basically micromanaging you and your business that they ultimately don't own a percentage of. I mean, they own the property, but they're collecting their rent. You should just be able to be worried about your business. If you're neglecting the property a little bit and you're not running it as professionally as you maybe should, then that could be a different conversation. But what I'm referring to right now is if you're in the property and you're doing the things that you're supposed to do, you're verifying and you're vetting your guests, and you're doing so in a reasonable manner, and you're not really running into any issues, but they're still micromanaging you, just imagine you dealing with that for 12 months. So when you're having these conversations early with the landlord and you're getting the vibe that maybe they're a little bit difficult to deal with, you have to think about that from a long-term standpoint. Is this worth having to potentially deal with them after I sign the lease? Because they may say yes, and it could be really exciting, especially if it's your first property to where you just want to be like, let's do it. But ultimately, that could come back to kind of bite you. So you really want to work with landlords that are, number one, not micromanagers, that are going to kind of let you do your thing, that understand you're going to be running it as a business. They just want to collect their rent most of the time. Most landlords just want to collect their rent. They're pretty chill, but not always. So you got to kind of watch out for those. Also, another thing that could be a little bit of an issue is if they are trying to implement a lot of rules and regulations on you on how you run your business. I'm telling you, ultimately it's the law of large numbers. So if you're getting all these no's and then you finally get a yes, you just want to kind of test their temperament towards the idea of Airbnb arbitrage. And if they ask questions, that's fine. But if you feel like they're, you know, when you have conversations with people and they kind of try to act like, oh, I've dealt with this before. Oh, I know all about this. Oh, well, if we were to do this, you really need to abide by this rule. Well, then that may not be somebody that you want to work with, and you should respectfully decline, in my opinion. What I would respectfully decline, because I've dealt with, you guys, I'm not here to preach to you, okay? I'm just telling you based off of my experience. I've dealt with slumlords. I've dealt with Karens, micromanagers, and I'm telling you right now, it's not worth it. So just hear what I'm saying, okay? And you can't always know. I've dealt with landlords that seemed amazing at first, and then they end up being horrible. But it just depends, okay? So I'm not here to scare you. I'm just trying to kind of help you along your journey. A lot of times it's not gonna be that way, but you just wanna kind of evaluate the risk associated. I hope that was helpful. So those are all of the questions for today's Q&A. If you guys have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. There's always a way to get a hold of us, either through email, call. We leave all of our information in the description, as well as on our main channels about. But if you're serious about getting into Airbnb or scaling, The hardest part is finding that property that actually works. Not only that, but we talked about regulations, getting the yes, things of that nature. What we've done at �LoCasa is we've built an entire platform where we go out and we get the no's for you. So we get the no's from the landlords in order to find properties that are eligible for Airbnb arbitrage in markets that allow it, to where you are able to get a legal short-term rental permit if it's required. And we run the numbers, we make sure that the property shows that it's gonna potentially turn a profit. We do all of the heavy lifting so you don't have to. So if you just go to LoCasa.com, which is linked in the description, you can see different properties throughout the country that have been approved from landlords for Airbnb arbitrage that you could lease today. If you guys have any questions, or if you wanna leave comments, make sure you put it down below. Like this video, subscribe for more content, and we'll see you on the next one.